Hi, I'm Greg Hunter. Welcome to USAWatchdog.com. With us once again, former Assistant Treasury Secretary, ahead of all economic policy during the Reagan administration, PhD in economics, former editor for the Wall Street Journal, and I'm talking about Dr. Paul Craig Roberts. Dr. Roberts, thank you for joining us today on USA Watchdog.
Thank you, Greg.
Well, I got to start with gold. And in the pre-interview, when I was setting this up, you said that, what's going on in the gold market is a fight to the death between gold and the dollar. A fight to the death is what you said. Will you tell me about this fight to the death between gold and the dollar?
Well, the Fed, in order to save the handful of banks too big to fail that are the product of the mindless deregulation of the 21st century, in order to save those banks, the Fed has had to create a tremendous number of new dollars. The United States has never experienced anything like the creation of new money that has issued from quantitative easing, which is now multi-years old. So, because the dollar has been a world reserve currency since the end of World War II, countries all over the earth have huge stocks of dollars. They've been accumulating them, and not just companies, not just countries, governments, not just the central banks, but companies, individuals. And as people view their holdings of this enormous supply of dollars in light of the extraordinary printing of new money by the Fed, they get nervous and they say, I should lighten up my holdings of dollars. I should get into something else. Maybe I should get into gold, or maybe I should get into some foreign currency. And so it puts pressure on the dollar's exchange value. Now, the first way that pressure manifested itself was the rising price of gold. Despite the fact that gold has been pushed down since 2011, it still has about the highest rate of return of anything in the 21st century, because it started out somewhere around $250 an ounce and is currently around $1,300 an ounce. So even though it's been pushed down, it's still way up. So as this price of gold reflected growing lack of confidence in the dollar, the Federal Reserve, in order to protect quantitative easing, which is necessary to save the banks, began manipulating the gold price in a new and more intense way. They used their bullion banks, their agents, to short the gold in the COMEX futures market. Well, the trouble with this policy is that it's been going on long enough that it's being recognized by people who formerly thought the Federal Reserve would never do anything like that. Of course they would. And people are catching on. Plus, another factor is central banks such as the Chinese and Russian are purchasing more and more gold. And they're accumulating fewer dollars and using their reserves to purchase gold. And so what is happening is that the actual physical quantity of gold, as opposed to the paper futures contracts, which outnumber the available supply of gold by many times, but the actual physical supply of gold has been moving out to Asia in such large quantities that the supply in the West to meet purchases is diminished dramatically. And so this is starting to bite on the ability of the Federal Reserve to continue this sort of operation of rigging the gold price by hitting the gold futures market with large amounts of futures contracts, naked shorts, at times when the market trading is non-existent or very thin. So it looks like the Fed could be running out of the ability to continue this policy, in which case it will be bad news for the dollar.
When you say running out, I mean, this is they are basically they're losing the fight to the death of the dollar. Is that what you're telling me? The Fed is losing the fight to the death of the dollar?
They're not losing right now, but they're going to lose because they're running out of bullets. But the Chinese and the Russians are not running out of dollars with which to buy gold. But the Fed is running out of gold with which to make these deliveries. Or not just the Fed, but the entire Western gold depositories.
What happens? What happens when we start hearing the news that we're not gonna default? We're gonna pay you in cash. We're not gonna deliver any gold to you. What's gonna happen at that time?
Well, that makes it clear that the available gold supply in the West for purchase is non-existent. The gold price would skyrocket.
And do you think that this happens this year, next year? I mean, it just seems to me that a lot of things that are coming together for the perfect negative storm for the dollar. And do you think that happens this year?
Well, it could, but you see, we can't get any real good information on what the gold stocks are. You know, the Fed doesn't allow any audit. It tells us, oh, we've got all this gold, but nobody is allowed to go see. And we also know, and it's been a position of gold traders for many years, that the Fed, formally, the way the Fed would suppress the gold price would be to lease its stock of physical gold to bullion traders who would sell it. And so they would actually dump real gold in the market to prevent the price rise. Now, the fact that they are having now to use naked paper futures, naked shorts in the future market, just paper gold, implies they haven't got enough real physical gold to suppress the price any longer, so they're having to take the suppression to the futures market where they can do it with purely paper contracts. So what is happening also then, to get any kind of gold, they raid the gold trust, like GLD, they raid COMEX. The bullion banks are the ones who can convert shares in these gold trusts into actual gold holdings. They have to be converted in big lots of 100,000 shares. So the bullion banks, JP Morgan, Goldman Sachs, they can actually acquire, when they drive down the price with naked shorts, they can then acquire these shares at a low price, convert them into gold, and that then loots the gold trust of the gold. So what we see is that the holdings of these gold trusts and of COMEX, actually gold in the vaults of COMEX, which stands behind deliveries on futures contracts, these supplies are shrinking. And to remind, we saw last year that the Federal Reserve was unable to deliver Germany's gold. Germany got anxious about its gold stock being held in the United States by the Federal Reserve as trustee and asked to have it returned. And they weren't able to get it. So all of this is evidence that the physical supply of gold available in the West to make deliveries to Asian purchasers is dwindling. And so, yes, the possibility of not being able at some point to make a delivery is real. And of course, that then would cause all confidence to be lost, and certainly in the dollar.
What is that going to look like here on the man in the street when you see this loss this fight to the death, and the death occurs with the dollar. What does it look like to the man on the street here? Sorry.
Well,
what does it look like to the man on the street here?
yes, here's what it would look like. He wouldn't be able to buy any gold at the price, the man on the street. And what he would be subjected to from a drop in the dollar's exchange value to other currencies would be the prices at Walmart would go through the roof. And if the man on the street's already having a hard time making ends meet, and all of a sudden he's faced by a massive rise in import prices, on which Americans are totally now dependent on imports. You know, the majority of the goods on Walmart shelves are imports. So you would see a huge hit to the living standards and the ability to cope even of the man on the street. That's where it comes home to the average American. And that's why I think this Federal Reserve policy is irresponsible. It's reckless because they've put 4 or 5 banks ahead of the entire American population. As far as the Fed's concerned, nobody's important but these 4 or 5 banks. We're going to save them if we have to drive the rest of the country into the ground. Well, this is not the way public policy is supposed to be run, and the Congress sits there and sucks his thumb, and the president sits there and sucks his thumb, and the financial analysts sit there and suck their thumb. But that's the implication of this policy. It is you eventually destroy the dollar, and that because of the loss of dollar value, the rise of import prices, just drives the rest of the people into the ground.
Right now it costs about, in most places, and if you did it yourself or whatever, around $30, $35 to do an oil change. What would happen to the price of an oil change if when the dollar loses its fight against gold in the pits there? What would happen if the dollar loses its fight against gold?
Well,
the price of oil.
I can't predict to what extent the dollar would drop with relation to other currencies. I can't predict how oil producers would price, what other currency they would use to price oil instead of dollars. They certainly wouldn't continue pricing it in dollars, which they wouldn't want. But you can know for a fact that the price would go up substantially.
An oil change might cost you $100 instead of 35. A gallon of milk might cost you $10 instead of $4 or something. Is that what you're talking about? A gallon of gas might be $15 a gallon.
Anything import dependent and anything dependent on fuel, imported fuel, would see substantial price increases. And it could actually turn into an hyperinflation because as the prices rise and the value of the dollar falls, see, it falls every time the CPI goes up another notch. You could find people domestically getting out of dollars as soon as they hit their hands. They could be spending them instantly in anticipation of further price rises. Well, when the velocity, that's called the velocity of money, the rate at which money turns over. If the velocity rises, then so does the inflation.
Are you saying that when you walk into a store, you should just consider that everything you look at is on sale? Relative to the future cost in dollars.
Relative to the future, that's likely the case, yes.
That everything is on sale right now.
Right. That's right. So when they talk about, deflation, how do you if you have deflation when you've created, 4 trillion new dollars the Fed's created? Something like that, right? 3.5, 4 trillion. Previously, the Fed's balance sheet was only $800 or $900 billion. Now it's over 4 trillion. I think, it's up there. So this is an enormous, and this happened in 5 years. This is an enormous increase. So the implication is that the dollar cannot be worth as much as it was prior to quantitative easing. Just can't. And yet they're able to prop it up. And they can keep it propped up because one way they do it is to keep the gold price from rising. They've driven it down substantially. And the other way is they have all these swap agreements in which they trade dollars for other currencies and use those currencies to purchase dollars. Plus, they require all their puppet states to do that. Canada has to keep its currency from rising relative to the dollar by creating Canadian dollars with which to buy the U.S. dollar. They make the Japanese do the same thing, the Australians, the Europeans. So they use their system of puppet governments to support the dollar by having them increase their own currencies with which to purchase dollars. And some countries have to do that just in order to protect their currency from rising so much that they can't export anything. Several years ago, that's what the Swiss government did. They said, look, flight from the dollar into the Swiss franc has driven our currency so high we can't sell anything. So what we're going to do, every time dollars come in to be transferred into Swiss francs as a safe haven, we're just going to print those francs. In other words, we're not going to let people trying to escape dollars drive our currency so high that our external trade collapses. So we will meet these demands by printing francs. And so in that way, Switzerland has fixed its exchange rate with regard to the euro and the dollar. When people try to flee into the franc, it just creates more francs. So as long as Washington has the world behaving this way, it can continue to support the dollar, especially if it can continue to keep the gold price checked and down.
Which brings me to the financial war. So we have a war going on between dollar and gold, and then we have a financial war, and it was kind of at a low boil, kind of discreetly. China was importing all this gold, I think, in 2013. China imported the entire world mine production of gold. And then you have this thing in Ukraine, which seems to be heating up in now eastern Ukraine, that they're wanting a referendum. They want to maybe join the Russian Federation, and of course the West says that's a ruse, a scam, whatever. But what the result of this is may end up being real war. But right now what we definitely have is financial warfare, and Russia is leading the charge. They've got deals between them and Iran where they're going to accept $20 billion worth of oil to the number one oil producing state is going to accept oil, so I guess they can sell it on the global market, and they're not going to use dollars. The Russian parliament has said the dollar is stained with blood, it's dirty, they don't want to use it, no more trade in dollars. They're going to be doing trade deals with yuan in China and rupee in India, and I would bet at some point, I think Germany's just going to say, yeah, we'll buy your natural gas with euros. I think the UK is going to say, sure, that natural gas deal, will you take pound sterling? I think that day's coming, and tell me about this war with the dollar, and the countries are now overtly, and I think the trend is to get away from the dollar. Tell me about this.
Well, I think this is brought on by the Obama regime's threat to impose sanctions on Russia. You see, the only way Washington can actually impose sanctions is because the dollar is the world reserve currency. And so all the payments mechanisms operate in dollars. And so if you exclude people with sanctions from the payments mechanisms, they can't transact. So this is what we did to Iran. And so now they're telling Russia, this is what we're going to do to you. So it's not that Russia is leading the charge. Russia is merely taking a defensive action. And they've waited a very long time to do this, as has China. Though, as you know, in recent months, China announced that it's time to de-Americanize the world. And what they mean is to abandon the dollar standard. So you've got China advocating that they simply ditch the dollar is the world reserve currency. And now you've got Russia threatened by the fool in the White House. And so what he's going to do is just ditch the dollar as reserve currency. And he is now entering into barter and ruble transactions, both with Iran and with other countries. He's not going, I don't think the Russians will accept payment in euros or pounds. They'll tell the British and the Germans, you want our energy, you pay us in rubles. So,
which means they have to go out and buy rubles.
They'll have to go out and buy the rubles, just like now they got to go buy the dollars to pay for oil. They'll have to go buy rubles to pay for oil. So he's able, because of the energy resources and because they have enough military prowess, that the White House fool is not likely to start bombing Russia. And so he's just saying, okay, we have another standard we're going to use. It's the ruble, gold. You can pay us in gold, you can pay us in rubles, or we'll accept barter deals, but no more dollar deals. No dollar deals. So this, I think, will quickly spread into China and most likely into the rest of the BRICS. So you'll have India and Brazil and South Africa. And this together is half the world's population. So they'll simply stop transacting in dollars. And if you want to, if American companies want to sell them something, they'll have to accept rubles, rupees, rand, the South African currency, the Chinese yuan. So, and if they want to buy from these countries, if the Western countries want to buy from the BRICS, they'll have to pay in those countries' currency. They can't simply say, here's dollars, here's euros. So I think that's what's happening, and it's coming out of American arrogance, American hubris. You see, Washington is a closed network. It's like an oligarchy. And the people inside the Beltway, they think in a very unique way. It only applies to within the Beltway. And so they think they can ignore the world because they have all the power, they make all the rules, and they're carried away with this, and the rest of the world now is in a position that they no longer have to put up with that. And so I think that this threat of sanctions to Russia will probably do more to bring down the dollar than the gold market will. Because I think it will just produce a faster movement away from the use of the dollar. Now, notice, Greg, that when the Russian-Iranian deal was announced, it was received in Washington with more American threats of sanctions against Iran and Russia. So all that does is confirm in the Iranian and Russian minds that they made the right decision. We have to get away, we've got to get out from under the dollar thumb so they can't put sanctions on us anytime we do something they don't like.
But Americans listening to this are probably going, so they use other currencies. And John Williams told me not long ago, he estimates at least there are 16 trillion liquid dollar assets held outside of the United States. 16 trillion. That's our entire GDP. And he says they're held outside the country, and he's worried that, they don't have to sell them all. They just have to sell, a few $1 trillion to start a stampede. What do you think about that? I mean, is that what you're talking about? That people saying, hey, we don't need dollars. We need to sell them.
That's what I was telling you earlier in this interview when I pointed out that the dollar has been reserve currency since World War II. And so there's a tremendous amount all over the world. And it doesn't take very much departure from that huge stock to put tremendous pressure on the dollar's exchange rate, pushing it down. And so, yes, that's what I think the United States faces.
So
And
prices could, in a short amount of time, if there's enough dumping of dollars and dollar assets, prices could double or triple or quadruple or in a short amount of, is that what you're saying?
it could go up hundreds of times.
Prices can go up hundreds of times
Yeah,
in a short amount of time.
short amount of time. Depends on the extent of the fear, or to what extent people leave the dollar, give up on it. You see, this is why the Federal Reserve is so irresponsible. And this is why the White House is so irresponsible. The Fed already faces a very bad situation, and then so what does it do? It creates $4 trillion more dollars in order to save 4 banks. And the White House already faces a bad decision, so what does it do? It undermines willingness of countries to use the dollar standard by imposing sanctions everywhere. So if you add up the IQ of the White House and you add up the IQ of the Federal Reserve and you multiply it by 1,000 trillion, it might equal 50.
You're saying
It's the stupid policies designed to completely destroy the U.S. dollar. You know, if I was the evil witch somewhere with all these powers and I sat there, how can I destroy the dollar? I would do exactly what the Federal Reserve and the Obama White House are doing.
Do you think they're doing it on purpose?
No, they're just stupid. They're arrogant. And they've gotten away with it for years.
And
they can rely on the financial press to tell their lies. You don't think the financial media is going to tell anybody what's going on. So they think they can get away with it. And they have. They've gotten away with it. But it looks like it's running out for the 2 reasons we talked about. The Russians and the Chinese and the Iranians and the rest of the world don't like it that the United States can impose financial imperialism on them, threaten them with sanctions, cut them out of the payment system. They don't like it. Why should they be in a system that can be used to wreck their economies and their businesses? So they're going to leave it. And the Fed has used up the gold. It can't even give Germany back its gold. And so it's resorted to selling naked shorts that it can't cover. And so one day the Chinese are going to place an order for 1,000 tons of gold. And nobody can deliver it.
And that's when the end.
That's when it hits the fan.
When they can't deliver.
When they can't deliver, it hits the fan. So what will they do? Well, they'll try to confiscate any gold stored in the U.S. in order to avoid failing. Well, what's the implication of that? It already tells you they haven't got the gold. So it's as good as an admission. So people don't really realize the situation and what it means for living standards of Americans. And if people understood that their government and their central bank did not regard the entire population with anywhere near the regard it has for banks, they'd be up in arms. So, and of course, the longer the crisis can be put off, the more Homeland Security can accumulate bullets, tanks, military forces, the more it can militarize the police, so that when protests do take place, they can be put down with violence. So I don't think the outlook for the United States in any way is promising. It's a very dangerous and unhealthy situation. And I don't think the United States can prevail. I don't think they can win the war against gold. I don't think they can win the war against that part of the world that's not willing to be a puppet state of Washington. So I don't think they can defeat the Russians, the Chinese, the Iranians. And I think that the risk of carrying it to military level, given the nuclear capabilities of Russia and China, the White House would have to be criminally insane to take it to that level.
Dr. Paul Craig Roberts, thank you for coming on to talk about the war with gold and the dollar and the financial war and real war. Thank you, sir, so much for coming on USAWatchdog.com.
You're welcome, Greg. Pleased to speak with you as usual.